Chapter 2. Capsule Explosion. "Are you sure you packed the book?" Tom asked his cousin. "Positive. And it may be the only copy in existence. That book's worth a fortune if it really holds the secret of the Emir's mine." Ed continued to search frantically through his suitcase, but he finally gave up in despair. "What's the name of the book?" Sandy asked. "Travels in the Remotest Araby," Ed replied. "Written in 1728 by an Englishman named Dalton." Ed explained that after hearing the jeweler's chance remark, he had hunted up books of the period which told about Kabulistan. In an old bookshop in London, he had finally come upon Travels in the Remotest Araby, which described the author's own visit to the mine. "What a fool I was to not be more careful," Ed chided himself. "Anyone could pick the lock off this suitcase with a safety pin. Someone must have stolen the book while I was on my way to Shopton." Suddenly, Tom's blue eyes flashed with suspicion. "That bomb scare at the airport! It might have been arranged to give the thief a chance to rifle your suitcase at the luggage counter." Tom strode to the phone and dialed his friend, Chief Slater, at the Shopton Police Headquarters. After telling the reason for his call, Tom asked for details on the bomb incident. "Soon after the New York flight arrived, we got an anonymous phone tip that a bomb had been set to go off in the terminal," Chief Slater said. "Naturally, I called the airport and ordered them to clear the building at once. No sense taking chances. Since then, we've traced the warning call to a booth right there at the terminal." "Did anyone notice the caller?" Tom asked. "Yes. An airline clerk gave us his description. A tall, sallow-faced man with several gold teeth, wearing a light-colored tropical suit." Tom turned and called the description to Ed. "Why, that fellow sat right next to me!" Ed exclaimed. "He tried to draw me into conversation." Tom passed this information on to Chief Slater. "Good lead," officer remarked. "We'll check on the airline passenger list, although the man probably used a phony name. I'll let you know if we find him, Tom." "Thanks, Chief." Tom hung up the phone and returned to the others with a thoughtful frown. "Looks as though you're right that book's value, Ed. Either Mr. Goldtooth wants to find the lost ruby mine himself, or he's determined to keep you from finding any clues to it." Mrs. Swift, hoping to take their visitor's mind off his disappointing loss, hurriedly asked Sandy to help her set the table for dinner. An appetizing aroma of fried chicken and biscuits was already wafting from the kitchen. Meanwhile, Tom and his father again examined the rubies with admiring interest. "Wonder how these rubies would work as macers," Tom Jr. remarked. "Macers? What are those?" Ed inquired. "Devices for generating and amplifying microwaves," Tom replied. "But I was speaking of optical macers, or lasers, as some people call them. You pump the atoms of the maser full of energy, and they give off light waves of a single precise frequency, just as an oscillator in a radio emits one frequency." "With a maser made from a ruby rod," Tom went on, "it was possible to generate a powerful concentrated light beam, with the waves all in precise phase." "Why not just use an ordinary spotlight?" Ed asked. Mr. Swift smiled. "By comparison, that would be pretty crude. Like a radio signal sent from an electric spark. A ruby maser gives a beam of only one frequency." "It makes an ideal method of communication," Tom added, "because a light beam, being of much higher frequency, can carry far more information than a radio channel. For instance, a maser signal of 100,000 megacycles can carry as much information as all the radio communication channels now in existence." Ed looked impressed. "Really that efficient, eh?" "Yes. I've been experimenting with it as a method of space communication up at the outpost," Tom told his guest. "Could come in handy if an enemy ever jammed our radio signals. Of course, I've been using pink synthetic rubies. These natural ones contain more chromium atoms. It would be interesting to see what kind of maser action these produce." "Well, don't think you're going to experiment with my ring before I even wear it," Sandy called. Over dinner, Ed Longstreet held the Swifts enthralled as he told about the countries he had visited in the Middle East. "Did you go to Kabulistan?" Sandy asked. "No, I couldn't get a plane reservation," Ed said regretfully. "Now that the country's been open to the outside world, so many foreign tourists and businessmen are flocking in that the few scheduled flights are sold out far in advance." Ed threw a glance at Tom. "Speaking of businessmen, I met a banker named Provard who was very much interested to hear that I was related to the famous Swift inventors. An American? Tom asked. Yes, I got the impression Mr. Provard might get in touch with you. Maybe he wants Tom to invent a new burglar alarm for his bank vault, Sandy giggled. More likely, he's checking up on our credit, Tom said dryly. Dad, you better make sure my atomic power capsule experiments aren't putting us in the red. Mr. Swift laughed. No danger yet, son. I have an idea the capsule could be the most profitable project Swift Enterprises has ever undertaken. In the morning, while Mr. and Mrs. Swift and Sandy prepared for a day's sail with with their guest and Phil Newton's family aboard the beautiful Ketch Sunspot, Tom sped off to his private lab at Swift Enterprises. This sprawling 4-square-mile enclosure of gleaming modern workshops and laboratories was the experimental station where Tom Jr. and Tom Sr. developed their scientific marvels. Tom was eager to run final tests on his new midget power plant. Now that his Atomicar was ready for public presentation, the only step remaining was to install the atomic power capsule, provided it checked out satisfactorily. A big if, Tom thought wryly. A steel and concrete booth, radiation shielded by Mr. Swift's amazing plastic, called Tomacite, had been built in one corner of the laboratory. A special exhaust system was provided to dispose of dangerous atomic vapors. The booth had a quartz glass window and an outside control panel. Inside, mounted on a test stand, lay the power capsule, about the size of an ordinary automobile battery, but far lighter in weight. Tom was just completing the electrical hookup when an alarm bell clanged. He jerked to attention. The main radar alarm! Flicking on the radioscope, he saw a blip of light moving in a rapid curve about the center of the screen, evidently an aircraft. Tom snatched up the wall phone and dialed the control tower. What's going on out there? A small jet circling the plant, the tower operator replied. The pilot requests permission to land. Says his name is Simon Wayne. What's his business? Tom asked. He claims he wants to see you personally on an important matter. Tom hesitated. Okay, set him down. Tom left his glass-walled lab and went outside. He shaded his eyes as he looked skyward. A sleek jet, bearing a red and black engine, came whistling down onto one of the concrete runways. Tom hopped into a jeep and sped out to meet it. Another jeep from the Enterprise's security building joined Tom as he reached the station airfield. Its driver was a slim, dark-haired Harlan Ames, security chief of Swift Enterprises. Ames leaped out of his jeep and stood beside Tom as he waited to greet their visitor. The pilot of the jet proved to be a huge, ruddy-cheeked man of about 40. But even more imposing than his size was an enormous blonde handlebar mustache was stuck out on either side of his bluff, weather-beaten face. Tom Swift, he boomed. Tom nodded and shook hands. This is Harlan Ames, head of our security staff, he added. The visitor shook hands with Ames. I'm Simon Wayne, he explained, American representative of Europa Fabric, as you probably guessed from the trademark on my plane. Europa Fabric was well known, at least by name, to both Tom and Ames. It was a European firm belonging to one of the biggest industrial cartels in the world. Rather an informal way to drop in, isn't it? Said Ames. Wayne's eyes froze on Ames, and he burst into a deep chuckle. When I do things, I do 'em in a hurry, Wayne said. Only way to meet business competition these days. I wanted to see Tom Swift and happened to be flying his way, so here I am. What did you want to see me about? Tom broke in politely. Wayne abruptly turned serious. Where can we talk business? Minutes later, Tom faced his visitor across a huge modern desk in the big sunlit double office, which he shared with Mr. Swift. I'm listening, Mr. Wayne. I've been reading in scientific journals about your new miniature power plant which produces electrical energy directly from atomic reaction, Wayne began. Europa Fabric can use that process. We can use you, too. Name your price. He took out a checkbook and poised the fountain pen over it. Tom grinned. I'm flattered, Mr. Wayne, but the rights to my midget power plant are not for sale. Nor am I looking for a job. If you'll pardon me, my dad and I think we have our finest scientific setup in the world right here. Wayne named a huge figure, then doubled it. Tom shook his head. Sorry, but my answer remains no. Wayne laughed. Very well. I like a young fellow who knows his own mind. He replaced his checkbook and pen, then took a card from his wallet and handed it to Tom. But if you should change your mind, The offer is still open. After seeing his visitor take off, Tom went back to his private lab, feeling a trifle dazed from Wayne's whirlwind tactics. Who was that? Who was Handlebar Hank? Inquired Bud, walking into the laboratory a few minutes afterwards. Fellow named Wayne from Europa Fabric, Tom grinned as he related his visitor's offer. But never mind him. I want to see how the mighty midget here pans out. Bud watched eagerly from the doorway of the test booth as Tom tightened a cable connection and inspected a few final details. The power plant was housed in a small rectangular capsule-like casing. It had a copper boss at each end, one positive and one negative, through which the electrical output would be drawn off. A sheathed cable led from the capsule to a small control box, which was connected to an outside control panel. "Keep your fingers crossed, pal," the young inventor muttered as he emerged from the booth and latched the door with a twirl of a lever. Bud, a young flyer from San Francisco and the same age as Tom, had watched the development of all his chums' major inventions and shared many adventures with Tom's co-pilot. He never failed to feel a thrill when Tom tested some new brainchild. "Good luck, genius boy." Tom handed him dark goggles, donned a pair himself, and then threw a switch. The needle of the output wattmeter swung sharply to the right. The next moment, both boys were hurled off their feet as the entire laboratory shook from a terrific blast. All right, that is the end of Chapter 2. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'll be back tomorrow with Chapter 3. Good night.